All right, and I am recording, so I'll keep an eye on the waiting room, but Terry and Barb, you were in there, and hopefully now you're in here. I'm just going to go ahead and get started, welcoming everybody to the Wednesday night edition of our daily updates on the Taft Corners Form-Based Code project. Team's here to discuss a few things tonight that have arisen throughout the day and the week thus far. And I just want to note that we're going to try to run just 7 to 7:30 tonight. It's a quick update, and that we will be back here again tomorrow evening at 7 for one more of these updates. We'll take Friday evening off. You can come find the planning staff out in front of Healthy Living 8 to 1 on Saturday. And then please mark your calendars for Monday evening at 7 for the work in progress presentation. So with that, Jeff, I'm going to turn it over to you and the team and mute my mic, and let's get started.
All right, tonight we're not going to show you much about what we're working on with the project, because we're still working on it. And our progress has been in that halfway to the wall category. We are definitely making progress, but we think it's best not to show you anything. It's sort of a combination of some incremental changes that there's more going on that would meet the eye, and a little bit of it's still sausage making. So we'll wait till we'll have a little bit more to show you tomorrow, and then of course a lot on Monday. But one thing, at least one person, if not a few, mentioned the idea of comparable projects. Somewhere else this has been done, I think was the specific language. And we can't show you anything that's directly comparable, but there are a lot of things that are similar. So Justin Flango of our team had put together a set of images that he dubbed recovering shopping centers. So these are recovering from being shopping centers to being town centers. All right, Justin.
All right, then everybody can see that?
Yep.
Great. Well, so yeah, as Jeff mentioned, we put together a couple examples here. A few are from around New England, and then there's one also from Colorado. And they're kind of different, you know, there's a lot of things that they have in common with Taft Corners, but some of them have some slightly different conditions. But we thought it'd be interesting to show you kind of how other places have kind of transitioned over time, and what that can kind of look like from the ground level view as well. So one example, and this one might be one that some of you are familiar with already. This is Mashpee Commons, which is on the Cape. It's on the Upper Cape. This is originally so this aerial is from 1991, which is pretty much about what the shopping center was originally when it was built in the 60s. Pretty standard kind of mini mall type of situation, but you can see the context. There's really not a whole lot around there. At the time that it was built, it was kind of sort of alone in the woods, you know, close to a couple state routes. Kind of standard format, you know, the shopping center in the middle, connected with an interior corridor, and then a field of parking around the outside. And then here's a more updated aerial from 2018. You can see it's kind of, the format has changed quite a bit. It's actually started to now sort of expand out from the original core, but it sort of transitioned from being purely a shopping mall to really becoming the downtown for Mashpee, which Mashpee doesn't really have much of a downtown now. There's just sort of an aerial view. You can kind of see how it's kind of configured. But you know, this parking field in a way actually sort of worked to its advantage. It was a place where it was sort of provided pads for development as it started to grow out. That sort of ring of parking sort of gradually moved farther and farther out to the outside. And then the interior part sort of filled in more like a traditional town would. And just a couple pictures there of kind of what that looks like on the ground. So again, this is sort of the main drag through Mashpee Commons, and it really does, you know, the architecture is really high quality, and it really does feel like a real main street.
Yeah.
some views there as well. And there's a couple interesting features to it. So one, I kind of mentioned how that parking field started kind of kept moving sort of to the outside. But one thing, they were really careful to make sure that there was always kind of a finished edge to the development, so that the parking really, you didn't go sort of abruptly from this downtown environment to a big giant parking field. And so you can see this street. This is kind of the edge of where the development stops. And what they did was they created these little liner buildings, and they were kind of meant to be temporary, although they've actually been there for quite some time now. But what they do is they kind of serve as you can see them, those are the buildings on the left, and then you can see the kind of more permanent development on the right side. But it sort of serves as, sort of a cap to the development on the end, and the parking sort of is hidden on the backside. And these actually serve sort of as incubator spaces as well for really small local businesses. So it serves a dual purpose. And they've been there so long, and they're actually so well done. It's possible that those actually will remain a lot longer than was originally intended. And so, I mentioned that it originally started as a shopping center, kind of expanded, became a little bit more mixed use. But one thing it sort of lacked for quite some time was a residential component to it. And so that's something that they've been gradually filling in kind of as it's expanding out now. And they've used a wide variety of unit types that are actually pretty interesting. So this one is a good example here. This is actually, so it looks like two buildings. It's actually a single building. And this is an 8-unit apartment building. And on the lower side, where the hill is sort of exposed, there's some more opportunity for businesses to go in there. And then you can see sort of going up the hill, there's some other also kind of small apartment buildings that sort of, from the outside, they sort of read like almost large houses that have been converted over time into individual apartments. So now kind of shifting gears, this one's out in Colorado. And this is also another example of a shopping mall that's sort of transitioned over time. This one's a little bit more embedded, though, in a grid of streets, so you can see sort of suburban development kind of coming up to it around the edges. And again, this is quite a large mall, though, a large interior mall with a really giant field of parking around the outside. So this aerial image is from back in 1993. And then sort of over time, same idea, sort of taking that property and very slowly starting to create a grid of blocks and streets, and then slowly filling in new buildings around the outside, and then slowly taking down the old mall that was in the middle, and gradually replacing that with more street-oriented and downtown architecture. And again, a couple pictures, high quality architecture, slightly different style, but, very walkable right up to the back of the sidewalk, along the main streets, having, retail at the ground floors, residential, and some office space above. And then integrating some of those things like a cinema into the development, sort of like you would find in the shopping mall that was there, but, putting it into a new format. A little aerial there, just kind of showing the overall context. Some more of the architecture there. And now this one's a little bit closer to home. This one is in Connecticut, and right next to University of Connecticut in Storrs. And so this is an example of not necessarily a shopping center that transitioned, but the idea of taking some a few parcels of relatively low density shopping commercial spaces here and things like that, and in creating a new town center where one did not exist before. So sort of within about 10 years, able to create a pretty robust downtown with housing that now sort of helps with the supply of housing for the university, and then creates like a downtown really and a gathering space for Mansfield, Connecticut, where there wasn't one previously. This one happened a little bit more quickly than some of the previous examples. The other ones kind of happened very, very slowly over time. This one kind of happened more in a short period of time, and it was sort of done by one developer. But you can see there, this is sort of that large new public gathering space that was created with the buildings lining around it. And it's quite active, used for quite a number of events. And then one last example, and again, sort of a slightly different context, but some lessons that we can learn from it for Taft Corners. This one's in West Hartford, Connecticut. So this one, again, aerial, this is from about 1992. This one, actually, you can see this area over here is their main street, and it's actually quite nice. But back then there was, some shopping centers and things that weren't kind of in keeping with the nice walkable downtown that they had. And so they wanted to figure out a way that they could sort of extend their downtown and sort of take up some of those parking fields and underutilized parcels and create a more robust downtown. And so there's a lot of development that sort of focused in this area right here, which previously you can see was kind of not used very much at all, and then filled that in. This one's called Blueback Square, but the same idea. This one's got a mix of office, of residential, of retail, as well as some gathering spaces for the community to kind of supplement the things that are already downtown. And that's all I have for this, but I thought, it just seemed like this would be some good examples to show, maybe to sort of get you thinking about the kind of things that we're looking at when we're looking at Taft Corners, and, some examples of how development may start to change over time once the vision plan and the code is implemented. And I don't know, Jeff, or anybody else, anything you want to add, or images you should go back to?
Yeah, could you go back to Mashpee, kind of leave that as the...
Yep.
I think the most people have knowledge of that one.
I've been adding a little commentary in the chat section too.
Yes.
There we go.
Anyone have any, just bring up any questions or such from anyone?
I found that very helpful.
Yeah, one thing definitely they all have in common, a little bit less the last one because it was amended right next to an existing town's main street. But it's kind of a given, but a lot of what you do when you're converting these areas, shopping center or whatever, big box retail, oftentimes the grid of the parking lots is like a pre-made block pattern. And you just start, sometimes you look at it, and I know it happened with us here. We looked at an aerial photograph, and due to our jaded perspective on the world, we looked at those big pads of parking and we saw blocks with some of the circulation streets.
You can see there, as Jeff mentioned, you can kind of see how the way that the parking was kind of set up to begin with almost started to hint at where those blocks should start to go.
Yeah, and I would add too, if you could move forward to one of the images looking down the street in Mashpee Commons.
Something like that.
Yeah, next one down on eye level, like that right there. So, one of the things about Mashpee Commons and really all of these places is the idea of, there are still some larger footprint buildings here, not massive big box stores by any stretch of the imagination, but, these are store footprints that, meet the requirements of retailers, across the country. And set aside for a minute the future of retail. Obviously, we don't know exactly where that's going, but it's important to note that there are ways from a design standpoint, and this can be coded to help to take these sort of building facades and actually help to kind of articulate them and break them up. So they're not quite as massive and they're not quite as monolithic as what we typically see in a mall, you know. And, you know, that image right there is a great example. You know, those look like a lot of individual buildings, and there are some individual buildings in there, but they're also very well articulated at the same time. Even the larger development like Belmar in Colorado that had slightly larger buildings, even those buildings had enough articulation and transparency to where they made for a great street space. And it's a space that you would want to walk in and be in, you know, whether it's grabbing dinner or, you know, visiting a shop or whatever. That is much different and a completely different feel than the sort of big box approach that is conventionally seen.
Yeah, and I know I sent out, this is redundant with the note I sent out earlier, but the small buildings in Mashpee, and there's one aerial view, Justin, that shows them really well, are a good example. I'm thinking about the little, with the shingle or shake siding, those.
Mhm.
They're a pretty good example of the kind of things, I think I put quotes over temporary in my message. Temporary sometimes is there a long time, but those are the kind of buildings that could be built at a first step. And if you notice in the aerial view, they're actually quite shallow. So these are the kind of things that could line some existing parking lots where you're not able to take that much of the parking for reason of there's a lease agreement and you can't take that much, or, you know, there are a lot of reasons. I would suggest one of the reasons is not that you really need the parking, because there's so much of it out there, but it's a kind of, you could almost call these liner buildings. And most retailers, and we talk to a lot of retail consultants, you know, with the exception of what used to be the anchor stores, which they're either, well, a lot of them are just going away or going online. Even in a shopping center, they'd have the big retail stores, but there are a lot of inline stores, and they're extremely flexible about the space they can go into. They really can't use a very deep space. You know, the big department store, I remember it well, and they needed a big footprint, but a lot of retailers, most other retailers don't. And they're even, some of the online retailers are establishing small bricks and mortar where you can go in and put your hands on something, order it, and they'll deliver it in a couple of days to your door. So retail it's in a funny state. One thing that we're hearing a lot is retail is likely to be kind of polarizing. They're the big online people who will mail you anything in a couple of days. But the bricks and mortar retail really wants to be in a really, it's kind of place-based. They're really interested in, it's something about the quality experience for the customer, et cetera. But they want to be in a great place, great environment, like not a strip mall, but like a street. So they feel comfortable, their customers feel comfortable, and that's we're not suggesting a lot of new retail in Taft's Corners. We're pretty conservative about that, I think, with good reason. But the kind of retail that's likely to be successful is really going to be the best bait for that stuff is a really nice kind of a quote unquote Main Street environment that people love to walk on.
I just put something in the chat,
Ah.
Jeff, which is, I was hoping one of these examples, the example that's up right now has trees over some of the parking right to above that row of buildings. But none of them has something that is happening more and more across the country that I'm hoping we make part of our form-based code, which is solar generation and canopies over parking. It provides shade in the summer for people's cars, some snow protection in the winter,
Mhm.
and it makes us more sustainable as a to me, it breaks up visually, makes it feel more like a group of houses than a parking lot.
Well, and yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And I'm thinking that what I'm seeing on these white roofs across the street are a lot of solar panels. That's a
Yes,
guess on my part.
no,
Um,
it's absolutely solar panels.
Yeah,
So,
they're pretty committed to that. Actually, you can see even from like the this
oh,
view
there they
from
are.
the aerial. I mean, you could see they're every place they can put them. They've been putting solar panels
It-
on there.
it-
Except
And so
over the
my, yeah, except over the parking, that
Yeah.
was my comment.
I would guess they probably haven't done that here, since the intention is that these parking fields will be
Mm.
developed, in the coming years, and so I would assume that's probably why they haven't gone to that step yet.
I know we've seen projects in the Southwest that are doing that.
Yes.
And they're not worried about a snow load, but you know how it can feel like when you first get in your
Yes.
car, like your flesh is going to stay on the seat when you get out. The solar gain at damaging your well-being by making that car an oven is pretty extensive. I did live in Florida for about 10 years, and I remember that feeling.
Yes, I'm hoping that we actually develop a library of ones that we like the way they look and think they would be compatible with Taft Corners and with snow. Obviously, they have to be high enough that the snow removal can happen under them. And you may want to put chargers under them as well. And so you may lose a few parking spaces by making more of a strip for the posts. But one thing could cover two cars on either side.
Yes, and I think that's an example of something that kind of, I think my colleagues chuckled a little bit at me when I used the example of like setting up a garden. It's kind of what we're doing here, laying out the beds for these things to grow. But that's an example of the kind of, I mean, detail in a good way, but the kind of extra detail that gets put into something as it's becoming real. And I think that's going to will need to be renewed, every few years, even with thinking about solar. Some of the technologies will change, although they're getting pretty mature, but that kind of thing will be ongoing. I wonder if Vermont utilities aren't already really pretty solar savvy. Why not offer them some opportunities in these parking fields?
I think they are, and there's a bare bones one that's behind the Unitarian Church in Burlington, which is the church at the head of Church Street. If you go into the parking behind it, there is a large, quite high solar panel. It's fixed, but the pickup trucks can plow under it, but you park under it.
Mm-hmm. Unless we could ask Matt if the town would like to go into the solar utility business. My tongue is in my cheek, Matt. But those are the kind of synergies that there are all kinds of opportunities.
Yeah, well, and I get your point, but our energy plan that was adopted as part of as an addendum to our town plan does expressly say that we want to encourage solar canopies in parking.
Hmm.
Interesting looking at Mashpee Commons. On the ground, you don't realize what a sustainable building development this is. You have to kind of go up and look down and see all those white roofs and photovoltaics. But at the same time, I know people have commented that they would like to see, not just flat roofs, but hip roofs and gables and so forth, which you can see there are some buildings like that. So you can kind of mix things up, and that just adds kind of architectural variety into the landscape.
Well, I would speak in, I always speak out for pitched roofs.
Mhm.
It's the water flows downhill theory. But I think unless we're at the equator, a pitched roof, you know, given if you're within, I've forgotten if it's 10 or 15 degrees of a certain angle, but I think there are going to be opportunities when a pitched roof can have solar panels on it that, you know, we're a little bit up north. Well, not here in DC, but you all up there. Whereas I think sometimes a pitched roof might be actually a pretty good angle for catching the midday sun.
It is.
Yeah, I know they've made roof tiles that also can function as photovoltaics.
Yes.
So it's kind of like hide in, you know, they don't not so obvious the function that they're performing.
Matt and I today were looking at a 4-story apartment building that had sort of a mansard roof. So a very steep pitch to the roof, and the top floor, the windows were halfway into the roof.
Yes.
And we were assuming from that probably 90% of the roof was flat, but it didn't feel like a flat roof from the street because you saw the steep roof from the start.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And yes, if the building's thick, it'll do that. But if the building's is not too thick, it could be that actually the next pitch of the roof isn't. But
Yes.
that kind of roof is, because I'm always looking at roofs because we code them. We make little things in the code to encourage people to build roofs. And the kind of mansard or the gambrel roof seems to be more of a thing in Vermont. It seems to be kind of natural to Vermont in all the buildings we've looked at. And it could actually, that could be perfect for solar, not the steep pitch, but the next one above it, or the flat, or a flat section behind it. So
Absolutely.
there's an example where things fit together.
Yeah. So I took photos of some of these things, and Matt and I looked at them today, and I will forward them on with comments. They're examples from within Chittenden County of 3- and 4-story residential housing.
Mm-hmm. Great.
So I have a question. I love all this great ideas that are floating around, and streets and different buildings and things. And I was just curious, you know, how developers are looking at this, and how on board they are, and what are their feelings of the change that's coming? Is that something that's embraced?
Well, that's interesting, and I'll speak to that, and then I would encourage anyone else on the team and anyone else to chime in, because it's all, you know, they have a lot of different ideas, and in general, I'd say most developers are in favor of it. There's some places where they're not. I think places where developers have not had any trouble doing whatever, like developers in Florida in the what, 1980s or 70s. I know one of them joked, if you could tie your shoes, you could make $1 million. And then they weren't interested in this kind of controls because they could just kind of run and gun and make money. And it was, other than the difficulty of arranging the bank loan and that kind of thing, it was, if you could tie your shoes. But where developers have, you know, where it's tough and where people are really contentious and trying to make sure they get decent development, and it becomes a process, you know, sometimes a fight. Those developers who've seen the problems, because people are, and I'm on a little soapbox here, because people are, you know, they want better development, so they challenge the development, sometimes stop it. Those people get really, I mean, the famous quote is with us, just tell me what I can build. Sort of, they're interested in figuring out a way to make this work so they can build, so they can do what they do. And if there's a project that'll pencil out, they'll do it. but there's just a natural love for more intense development on the land. And the ones who are more mammals than dinosaurs, I'm going to get myself in trouble here, but understand that it's a complex world, and things like inclusionary zoning and solar energy, doing energy, tight buildings, things like that. It's part of their amenity, and their market, the people they're selling to, like that. Anyway, so there are a lot of developers who are like, okay, let's do this. And at some point, you've got to like to do something nice more than something where you just make the money and get out of town. And for other developers, it's kind of a little bit of a wake-up call, where they're adjusting to a sea change in the environment. And for some of those people, it's tougher. They're so used to doing this thing where they risk a lot of money, and they've had success in the past, and now you're asking them to take a left turn. And there's some resistance to it. It goes both ways. And the last thing I'll say is oftentimes there's more developers have a learned fear of any kind of interference or control. So there's a knee-jerk, leave me alone. But I'd say specifically with the form-based codes, when they get to understand them, they appreciate them because they can tell what to do and what not to do. So they can kind of see the rules and figure out what they can build and what they can't build. So it takes they're not so much gamblers. And I hope there's some coherence to what I was saying. Some of it is, I'm like, my nose is right against the subject, so I don't have good perspective.
I would say too that Vermont is known for being independent thinking, both in our representatives at the national level and locally. And our developers are used to dealing with Act 250, which is a significantly difficult and hard to predict the outcome process. And I think form-based code will, on the whole, actually enable a developer with that surety of what can and can't happen to go ahead. I feel like on the whole, this is a positive for developers and for the town.
That's what we're going for.
Yeah, I think one of the mutual goals is predictability. If I do this, I'll get an approval. If you do this, it will meet what the community has said it wants.
Yeah, and it's that quote, Peter Park, who was the planning director in Minneapolis, and then he was the planning director in Denver, Colorado. Now he's a consultant, but when he was planning director, I think it was in Denver, or maybe both places, he would say, somebody's going to come to our city and wants to build the kind of building we want. Why would we make it hard on them? Conversely, if they're going to build the kind of building we don't want, there are plenty of reasons to make it hard on
them. Jeff, I don't want to monopolize, but I want to let you know that I was on last night, and then I was able to watch Monday night's update today. And as I watched it, I jotted down a bunch of comments that are specific to things that were talked about the last two nights. And I'd like to sort of read them into the record if I could.
Okay, I would say go for it.
Should I go for it now? Okay. One is, both nights there was a lot of talk about streets being pedestrian friendly and being able to have farmers markets and things. And what I realized we didn't say explicitly is streets that can be closed down, blocks that be closed down for a farmer's market or a festival, for special events, that it's just already planned that street is not always a through street. I also, because I'm big on transportation, I can see that someone commented on Monday night that they didn't want to be carrying the parking once and then carrying groceries from Hannaford across a lot of blocks. And I could see the need for a shuttle bus around the area of some kind for people who can't walk as easily or in inclement weather and so forth. I really, really like the idea that I didn't realize you had broached on Monday night when I saw it on Tuesday of extending Connor Way, which becomes Wright, extending that to the new Trader Lane. I think that's a really important grid street and also an opportunity for a downtown street that's potentially convertible to pedestrian only in the future or for special events. On the Monday night presentation, some of the drawings showed on the Maple Tree Place side. They showed in the upper northwest quadrant how buildings could fill in around the stormwater pond and and around Shaw's and so forth. And I just want to say for me, and I think for the Planning Commission in general, we really look at that area until we find it, until or unless we find another location, we look at that as a mode shift area, an area where we'd really like to have a transit center and rentable electric bikes and park and rides or other services. And so I would like to keep that northwest quarter of the Maple Tree Place area open to those things. And I realize that's in conflict with some of what was shown. It's just that to me, mode shift would be the highest priority in that area. I didn't know if it was ever said, but the mall, not the mall, the green that was shown on Trader Lane, I got to understand it better. And I think I'm hoping it would be one way around it. So it's like a counterclockwise circle if you want to keep driving around, yes. And we didn't talk much about one-way streets otherwise, but I think we may want to at times. I liked the cycle track idea that was presented on Monday night when I wasn't on. And the idea of the parking underneath a residential or other building just to the west of that green on Trader Lane. I thought it was a good, well thought out idea. Long range, I think we need to plan for fewer cars, even if there's as much shopping as happens now.
Yes.
If we're going to meet our energy goals, we're going to have more public transit, more other ways of getting around. And technology is advancing fast. So I was really pleased to see this evolution of parking lots that was shown at the beginning tonight by Justin. This evolution of parking lots into space that has another use. And that was very encouraging to me. And so I don't want to be driven by solar. I don't want to be driven by the automobile. I don't want the plan to be automobile centric, but we do have to allow for automobiles in the short term in a way that will allow us to take over that space in the long term. And I will stop there. Thank you for listening to all those comments.
Okay, I tried to write them all down, but I imagine you could send us your list. And I'm not going to answer them now, but I want to save them. And some of them are, there might be a couple that there's a simple answer and they kind of go away. It's like, oh, no problem. And others are just things to talk about where it's sort of a compromise. But I think those are good observations. And, you know, we're in the same ballpark with you.
Yep. Well, I was just hoping those comments would help you know if you're going one way or another on one of those points that there's someone that supports that way.
And I appreciate that. Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes, you know, the people who are happy with something are quiet and somebody who's doesn't like it makes a lot of noise. So
well,
that hasn't been the case in Williston, though. I want to actually give you guys a pat on the back for that.
And I want to say I enjoyed Terry's, who's on tonight, and Donna's comments on Monday when I wasn't on. And I'm going to try to follow up with Donna because she was saying she didn't want anything more than 2 stories, and that's sort of in conflict with what I think the goals are in terms of focusing our development in this area.
Yes.
And so I want to work on that. And that's one of the reasons I've been taking pictures of area buildings that are 4 stories high for a little more density. Because I think that you'll find none of us are yet ready to think about high rise here.
Yeah, well, Paris is 6 stories and it's really dense dense and beautiful. But I appreciate your talking to Donna, and I look forward to being able to, meet a lot of you, including Donna for sure, in person, not too long. But yeah, and that 2 stories, you could actually get a lot of development here, but the whole idea is, have it here so it's not splattered out everywhere else, because that's the thing that really creates traffic and really eats up the land. And it doesn't give you affordable housing.
Right. And of course, that's what I think, but I also understand and appreciate Donna's perspective, and I want to talk about it more with her.
Yeah, well, thank you for doing that. Well, I think with that, we might wrap up. We're doing a in-studio pinup to take stock of where everything is tonight after this.
Thanks so much. That was super helpful to look through those examples.
Could you
Thanks, Justin.
explain the focus for tomorrow night?
All right.
Tim, did you get that question, Jeff? Tim was wondering if you're prepared to share what the focus of tomorrow night's 7 o'clock workshop will be on.
I apologize, but no, because we're all in the habits and mentally organized towards being able to talk about like what happens on Monday, but these are a little bit ad hoc, and we're kind of, hate to say coming up with them on the fly, but that's what we did. We knew what we talked about tonight was something we should talk about. We didn't really plan it until starting at about 5 o'clock. So there's a little bit of suspense. We might talk more about, we might talk more about streets tomorrow and what makes a safe street and yet includes cars.
I'm perfectly fine. It's a creative process, I think is what you're telling me, and that's what you got to do. So.
All right. Yeah, I'll give you a 60-40 for talking about streets tomorrow.
Okay. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Great. Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, everybody.
Good night, all.
Good night.